Hello, my name is Jim. This is my podcast, The Bloody Vegans. You're very welcome to it. Each week, I'll be traveling ever deeper into the world of veganism, discovering along the way a multitude of viewpoints from the political and ethical to the practical. I'll be doing this through a series of conversations, each aiming to further illuminate my understanding and hopefully yours of all things plant-centric. And this week's no different. I'm going to be chatting with Sam Godfrey. Now, Sam has got an incredible story. He was a former Marine, Royal Marine, a very keen cyclist, incredibly fit chap, power lifter, you name it. Sam had done it. Very active guy, and was diagnosed with a form of cardiomyopathy. And from that point, his veganism and his journey into plant-based lifestyles began. So I'll let Sam tell the story, but without further ado, this is my conversation between me and Sam Godfrey.
Mine came about through health. That was what kind of triggered me into this. Being really honest, I didn't really know anything about veganism or plant-based lifestyle. I didn't know that there was a difference between the two, and was pretty ignorant, I think, to kind of the vegan world. I jumped on board a stereotype, ran with that, and just thought it was a bunch of incredibly fussy people. So it wasn't, something that I was interested in at all. And then it would have been coming up 3 years ago. I was suffering with a load of palpitations, really high heart rate. I noticed that when I was cycling that I could be out with friends and my high heart rate was just 15, 20, 30 BPM higher than theirs, but I was probably finishing the ride quite strong and feeling a little bit more fresh than maybe others were. So I got it checked out. Anyway, had a bunch of tests and stuff, and found out that I had something called dilated my cardiomyopathy, which basically was like my left ventricle couldn't do a full open and close. It wasn't kind of strong enough. So it was in its response, it was almost like in fight or flight mode. So it was just doing lots of little open and closes. And there's always typically something that can be done with most things. If you had AFib or whatever else that might have been going on in there was typically something they could have gone, well, look, we can do this procedure, or we can put you on this medication, and we'll get you back rocking and rolling. And mine was one of the few that didn't. So yeah, it was like, well, surely there can be something. And I just was doing loads of research. I was adamant that there was something that could be done, whether that was me taking control of it or pushing for a specialist. And yeah, in the end, just everything kept coming up around vegan or plant-based, and it didn't seem like a coincidence. It wasn't like I just hit one search and all of a sudden there was one article and I was jumping off the back of that all the time. There was this reoccurring theme, loads of stuff around being plant-based. And I ended up being pointed in the direction of Rich Roll's Find an Ultra, that book, just as all of this came about. And the guys that recommended said, look, if you read this, we guarantee you're going to go vegan. I was like, I'm not convinced, but okay, I'm going to give it a read. It sounds like it's a great read. And yeah, I finished that book. I then had a follow-up scan to say, look, yeah, it's confirmed. There isn't a huge amount we can do with it. We want to put you on a bunch of blood thinners and beta blockers and so on. And I just didn't want that at all. At the time I was 32, I think. And I was like, I'm just not being on that for the foreseeable. So I said to my wife, I was like, I'm gonna give a plant-based lifestyle a go. And once she picked up her jaw off the floor, she decided, well, look, if you're going to do it, then I'll do it with you. And literally the next day, just stopped eating meat, any animal products, um, and that's kind of been it. I've never gone back. So yeah, it's about 2.5 years. So
Wow.
here we are.
And I take it had the sort of the impact upon the condition that you'd kind of read about and expected it to have.
Yeah, I think if I'm really honest, I could probably have better results from it. I think, I know yourself, you've been vegan now for probably a similar sort of time as I have, I expect. So you would have seen how much it's changed. And we joked previously about, the aisles at Waitrose, the vegan section getting so much bigger. Um, but when I first started, because I didn't know anything about this, I downloaded the Deliciously Ella app and just learnt to cook again. So I was following the recipes every night. So everything was, you know, um, there was nothing that was processed in my diet. It was just from scratch all the time, just very conscious of how I was living and eating. And that was probably the only way you could really do plant based at the time, which is kind of mad when you think of it only being 2.5 years ago. Um, but there wasn't as many options around. So yeah, everything was kind of put properly. Whereas now it's far easier to, get a bunch of processed stuff and probably isn't having um, as good an impact as it would be if it was, whole food, plant based instead. But in terms of the results it's had, yeah, my pump fraction at the time was down to 40%, where the normal kind of pump fraction would be about 55. Um, so yeah, I was well below that, so I was at high risk of heart attacks and strokes and so on. But yeah, my follow-up scan 6 months later had seen it move to 45, I want to say it was. Um,
Wow.
and now my last one was at 53. So, you know,
Wow.
if we look at a few things that have happened, yes, I'd always eaten a lot of meat, especially. I wasn't necessarily into dairy as much, but you know, my staple of my plate was always, yeah, around animal products. And now I don't have it, and my heart seems to be doing all right. And there's also some other conscious things in there. I had to drop a lot of muscle mass as well because I was trying to do kind of powerlifting and endurance, and the dodgy ticker, the two probably weren't the best uh, combination. But yeah, I dropped the muscle mass. I chose to kind of pursue cycling as my go-to, and yeah, everything just seems to be going well. But I found my recovery had improved. That um, I had more energy in me. I noticed that pretty much instantly. I would say within 2 or 3 days, I just felt much more sprightly. I didn't feel as heavy. You probably experienced this as well. That if you finish a meal, you can be very full and have enjoyed it, but you don't necessarily feel uncomfortable. I felt like sometimes there'd just be a big weight in your stomach
Mm.
previous. Whereas now it's like I can just be really comfortably full and just know that I've had a great meal. Um, so yeah, it's been really positive. It's completely transformed. How I exercise now, the results of that. The exercise, and then also, yeah, my heart is in a good place at the point where you know that not that they're not fussed about where I am, but there's certainly less of an urgency now to check up on me and to make sure there's less frequent follow-ups and stuff. I think until I hit normal, then I'll always be on the radar. Um, but yeah, other than that, it's good. I can't complain.
It's well, and more power to you. It's incredible to go from, was it 40% to 53%?
Yeah, yeah,
That was
forty
just,
percent.
and you said 55 was about normal.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. So
Because I must admit, I didn't. He didn't tell me about the 55% being normal first. So when he said 40%, I was like, "Wow, I'm 60% off the mark."
yeah,
I
yeah,
thought
that would have been
I'm
my
quite
reaction as
literally going to
well.
die in the waiting room, but I didn't, which was positive. Um, and yeah, so yeah, it's a big leap forward. So the frustration is that you have to wait that 12 months to see the progress.
Right.
So it seems to be kind of the start of Feb is when I have everyone. But it's almost like a slight personal challenge of going, right, well, I've got 2% more to get back now in 12 months. What can I do? Um, so yeah, that's something I'm trying to work on.
That's the cyclist in you wanting to improve the stats.
It just, yeah, I've always been like that. We joked about, conversations at 16 years old and stuff. And my conversation was that I wanted to join the Royal Marines. And my parents were not happy with that at all. So obviously I went and done it. And yeah, I've always been very headstrong and very determined. And I've never, especially when it comes to physically, I think there's, from an academic point of view, I was always okay. I never necessarily applied myself as well as I could have done. But I think with a physical limit, it almost feels like we don't have a physical kind of roof on our potential. And I think you'll see, pro athletes will stay the same, that it's all just down to us as how much we want to, push. And I do think there's an element, obviously, of genetics in there. But I was just determined to say I'm untouchable, and that's kind of how I thought I was. And obviously, this was the big wake up call. But I thought there's got to be a way around this. So I was just pretty determined to try and find one. And it seems like I've got there, but
Yeah.
we'll see.
I'm intrigued just as somebody who's not come across the condition. So you mentioned like you were when you were in the Royal Marines, etc.
Yeah.
Um, is this a kind of condition that you have for life, or is it something that you developed? Is it just one of those that's just not diagnosed but existed? So were you kind of experiencing some of those, some of the effects, or perhaps not, as the case may be, but it was still there when you were in the kind of Marines?
No, so I literally had never experienced any effects. Because when this came about, I started to ask about, if it's hereditary, is it worth doing tests? And unfortunately, it's one of those things that they're not confident necessarily in the testing to know that it'd be 100% accurate.
Right.
So why cause upset in the family and maybe put people
Mm,
on edge if
mm,
everybody's feeling fine? So we didn't pursue that. I'd never felt any symptoms growing up. And I know when this came about initially, the cardiologist, and what was really nice is that he was a cyclist as well. So every kind of conversation about what the problem was, he just referred to it in cycling terms, which was great. It was like this: look at your heart like the gear system. He would go, and it just became very easy for me to just go, okay, I see where this is. But the initial thoughts were that it might have been a case of I've kind of trained myself into that, like I've just exhausted my heart. Because the first 3 months I wasn't allowed to do any exercise at all. They wanted to see if there was any recovery at all from me doing nothing, because he thought that I just overtrained. I mentioned obviously I was doing kind of powerlifting and weightlifting and various other bits and pieces on top of the cycling. And he was looking through my Strava stats at cycling. He was saying, like, what else are you doing? And at the time, we calculated I was doing about 30 hours of training a week, as well as doing a full-time job. And he was just like, this is excessive. It looks to me like you've probably just done this to your heart. You need to just give it a break for a bit. But in the 3 months, we saw no progress. And he was like, okay, this is either something that has just developed, or maybe it's just been underlying, and now it's just about timing that it's surfaced. So yeah, it's really hard to know. But obviously now my family have to kind of make people aware should they have any medical issues that my brother or my son or whoever has got a heart issue, um, just to be mindful of now. But it's nothing that is necessarily a concern for anybody, which is kind of nice.
That's reassuring to know, I guess.
Mm,
It'd be good to. I just wanted to sort of reverse back to a point that you made there. That's just sort of occurred to me. That's kind of quite interesting to me. Is when you were first kind of diagnosed, that the route that the cardiologist specialist wanted to take was one of medication. You know, you talked about
yeah.
the solution was beta blockers and so on and so forth. Was a dietary change ever kind of on their radar? And then I suppose the follow up to that would be like, what was their kind of response when you started to talk about how, well, the thing that's changed in my life that's increased this capacity is my diet.
Yeah, I mean, the there wasn't a conversation around any change of diet, um, change of lifestyle, in terms of pick your preferred subject. Would you like to continue weightlifting or cycling? Um, I chose cycling, um, but there was no mention around the diet. In terms of the follow-up conversations, um, there hasn't really been any. It's I've mentioned it. The conversation's moved on.
Hmm.
Um, I think some people, and this is probably is more of a broader conversation, I guess, is that some people are slightly more receptive than others, as you know, right? I think,
Yeah.
can get caught in a conversation, and some people are really open to that, and there'll be others that aren't. And, they'll either try to shut it down or will move on very quickly. And I felt like maybe that was what had happened, in the conversations there was that it was acknowledged, but we were moving on. Um, so yeah, there was nothing really came from that in the end. Forgive me if there was I think I missed the first part of the question there, Jim.
Yeah, no,
Um,
no. I think you covered it really. Yeah, it was just whether
yeah,
they'd initially kind of suggested it as an option, as an
no,
alternative
it
to the
was
beta blockers,
it
but
was
I
just
think you covered
yeah,
that.
warfarin and beta blockers. Um, and I think I, I've never wanted to take medication of any sort. I've never really had a go-to. If I had a headache, I drink water. I would just let it run by, that sort of thing. I was very keen to stay away from putting anything in the system. Um, and that was, I wouldn't say that was something that I've always been that way, but I mentioned in the Marines, I broke both my shins in several places when I was um, 18, 19 at the time. And I was just put on a lot of ibuprofen and codeine and stuff at the time. And I didn't realize how much I was taking of that. It was just given to me. It was, you'd follow the instructions on it and so on. But you can't buy that strength from a chemist, and I was on that for 6 months. And then, if I did have a headache, 6 months after that, it just didn't touch me, so you almost became immune to that pain relief. So, yeah, from there on, I was just like, you know what, this isn't for me. So I'd have always tried to find a more natural option, which, sometimes you can find, sometimes you can't. But yeah, just exercise, I guess, whatever best practice you can.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I was a bit skeptical of any sort of reliance on anything that doesn't feel quite as natural as if there's an option that is. I'm intrigued as to a point around kind of friends and family. I'm just thinking, like you receive a diagnosis like that, trying to put myself in those shoes, and
Mm.
you come home and tell your friends and family, and sort of almost talk to them about how you don't want to go down the route that the specialists and the doctors are telling you to go down, and you want to find an alternative. And then eventually, after you've done that research, you come up with plant-based plant-based lifestyle. And you mentioned there that your wife was super receptive to that. Were Was that like an immediate receptiveness, or was she going on that journey? And I suppose the broader friends and family, your circle of friends, were they a bit skeptical as to why you wouldn't want to just take the advice that you were given?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's funny. So my wife and I had moved back in with my parents. We were in the process of buying a place, so we'd moved back in with them. It was this kind of interim period, and with my parents, we would get back from work. My dad might have done a chicken or something, and then the four of us would just grab a salad together, and everything was kind of like that was the routine. So we would quite often eat together, and then you go to making this decision, right? And that just creates a divide in the household instantly. um, there was definitely an air of skepticism, I think, within the family. My mum and dad are both trained nurses, so they have kind of that understanding of a medical background, but very much obviously of a Western medical background. So would look at the procedures and take the advice of the experts. But I guess they also knew me and know how headstrong I am, and that if I'd made a decision, there was typically very little point in trying to challenge that, because I was probably going to take it on anyway. But no, my wife was incredibly receptive, and I think if I wind back the clock to when I was diagnosed, my whole kind of life has been sport to some degree, whether that was playing football from the age of kind of 6, 7 years old, or whether that was then, weight training and then cycling, it had always been around. And, we talk a lot at the moment about mental health and well-being. And, the times when I operate mentally at my best is when I'm physically very active. Those two go hand in hand without doubt for me. And when that diagnosis hit, it was like a huge part of me had been taken away, and I felt very vulnerable for the first time. That it was that reminder that I wasn't indestructible, um, and that I then almost felt like I had to reinvent myself. Um, so yeah, I think they'd probably seen how much it had hit me. That there was a real fear, I guess, on what was next. Um, because we didn't know, at that point it was rest for 3 months, but, also prepare because you might need to sell your bikes because you're probably not going to get on one again. Um, so it was a real, yeah, just an unsettling moment to say the least. And I think that really helped. My wife saw that in me and was just like, we're just going to give it a go. Because I said to her, let's just try it for 6 months. I've got nothing to lose. We'll try it until my next scan. If the results don't improve, we can say we've tried it. And, if we go back to how we eat, then we go back to how we eat. But if the results improve, then we know we're doing the right thing. Um, she was super supportive. But I've always been the cook in the house. So she was like, well, go ahead. As long as you're still cooking for me, then I don't mind. So yeah, it just went from there. I think, the wider audience now of friends and family is, my sister. She's probably more so vegetarian, but certainly more conscious, I think, of the volume of animal products that are eaten. I know one of my brothers and his wife are reducing the kind of meat volumes, I guess, throughout the week. So there is a slight ripple effect in terms of converting. Um, do I ever see it happening? I'm not sure, from their side. But the thing that I really appreciate is the effort that they go to help. If we get together, obviously not at the moment because
Yeah.
we're not getting together at all. But before all of this, if we had a gathering, they would always make sure there was options. Whereas when it first came about, we weren't trying to navigate our way through it. It was a big learning curve for us, and I think a lot of people just didn't really know where to start. So it was always that, well, could you bring something that you're okay with eating,
Yeah.
and we'll make some space for it at the table. I think it was a little bit like that. But yeah, I think think largely speaking, it's had a small effect within the family space. Um, Seeing more and more friends certainly get involved a bit more, and I think we spoke about mutual friends that are seeing great results from them making that lifestyle change, from their physical point of view, and I think that was the trigger for me, and I think that would just be the relevant trigger, I guess, within my circle of friends because we would typically all be doing the same things. So, if they're seeing that I'm cycling, quicker or just climbing quicker, that I'm recovering well, then all of a sudden that pricks the attention
Hmm.
on their part. So, yeah, I guess it would just differ from circle to circle, but yeah, there's been some sort of knock on, I think.
I was going to ask that actually, and you covered a little bit there, but I'd like to explore a little further. I'm thinking of the world of kind of cycling, or whether it be kind of social groups that you've revolved in, that have revolved around various sports that you've been involved with this like very active lifestyle. Those
Mm.
people are often driven by improvement in performance, and they suddenly start to see, or I suppose gradually start to see, Sam's, like you say, Sam's climbing better, and he's recovering faster, and he appears to be sort of setting the pace more than he perhaps was before, and it's pricking the attention. Was there a degree of skepticism insofar as, well, it's probably not the diet? He talks about this diet, but it's probably that he's putting in more hours on Zwift, or he's he's
Yeah, definitely that.
it's those new pedals he's got, or
Yeah. Yeah,
it's
I'm saving weight wherever I can. Yeah, I think there probably is and was. I think everybody and whether it's something to be thankful of, I'm not sure, but I think everybody's been very respectful and maybe not to say that. Um, so whether that's something they've got going on internally, I'm not sure, but nobody's vocalized it. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I'd imagine it probably was. I think the conversation my wife and I will have quite frequently is, the reception that you can get sometimes when you say that you are vegan or you're plant based is that it's almost challenging, what people are putting on their plate. There's a big
yeah,
question mark, then a big arrow pointing inwards. Um, and I think maybe it's along the similar sort of lines of it can't be that, it can't be because I'm eating the right way. Um, so maybe it's something else. And like you said, maybe it's just more time on Zwift. And, actually, when I think of on Strava, comparative of the years of pre plant based to now, I wasn't actually cycling any more or any less, um, but I was cycling better. So I think there's a direct correlation there, but I guess it's up for debate within a family and friends space. I'm not sure.
it's either an incredible placebo, or it's
Yeah.
or there's something in
Yeah,
it.
everyone else is going along with, flapjacks, and I've just got carrots, and just powered by plant wherever I go. But yeah, maybe. I'm not sure.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting there that you raised that point about yourself and your wife. I've certainly been through that journey, and still go through it on a regular basis. Actually, of the moment you kind of mention kind of veganism or plant based, or any kind of term that relates to the non-consumption of animal products, is this sort of almost, there's a preconception there that you're judging the other person's kind of choices and plates, etc. Was
Yeah.
that something that you were prepared for when you went on this journey? Because I'm conscious of it, because I think if you go into the journey initially because of watching Cowspiracy, or for animal activism reasons, you probably have a degree of expectation that that's what's going to hit you, because that's kind of the media that you're surrounding yourself in. But I'd imagine if you're going down the route of health, wellness, fitness, that you'd probably Maybe you probably were actually. It's probably not giving you enough credit, but maybe you wouldn't have been as prepared for that conversation as someone who's kind of gone in through an activism route. Was that your experience, or were you kind of like eyes open as soon as you started to research that you were gonna have these conversations with people on repeat almost?
Yeah, I mean, they're great conversations as well when they come up, aren't they? If I'm really honest, I wasn't prepared in the slightest. I think kind of like our social spaces, the algorithms work and you get shown more of the stuff that you like. And, I read that book and that really inspired me. And, I continue to be a huge fan of Rich Roll and the work that he does. But, the next thing was Netflix. And like you said, it's then Cowspiracy. So, you went through Cowspiracy, Forks Over Knives, the usual, I guess, welcome to the vegan world documentaries to go and jump on. And that's what we did. And I think very naively, then, you hit kind of the menu button come the end of that, and you just assume the rest of the world's seen it. So every time that question or conversation came up, it was quite jolting. I could feel that knee jerk of why are you asking me that question? And in maybe in that manner as well, when we both know that this is the right way to go. And then you remember, actually, no, not everybody is necessarily, had that trigger that's got them into it. And seeing the thing and maybe taken the info on, because I think, when you're consuming animal products, we kind of have always known growing up, some of the processes, maybe not to the extent, um, but we're aware that when you drive past somewhere, you see, that farm animal, and the chances are that the next time you go to your supermarket, you will buy said animal. We've kind of always known that, but there's always been a disconnect of the journey from field to kind of freezer or whatever. So I think, for me, it was a case of I had to just remember that, I'd seen that. I now feel that way. I didn't feel that way previously. And I had to just remember that person that was asking me or challenging me, whatever it might have been, just isn't quite there yet. Whether they ever will be, I don't know. But at the moment in time, they're not. And I need to just think about how I handle the conversation. So yeah, I wasn't. I was very naive to it, and it's still a massive learning curve, and I think it will be forever because no two questions are typically the same, whilst they're always with the same sentiment. The delivery can be so different, and I think that then makes you have to really reassess how you handle that question or criticism. I find more often than not it would be a criticism. It might be quite jovial, but it could be, something that's meant with intent. But yeah, I guess it's just a continued learning curve.
Yeah, I think that's yeah, you make a really valid point there. It's the tone that sometimes feels triggering, doesn't it? And
Mm,
it's really difficult to not react and to get into that space of, that would have been exactly the question that I would have asked 5 hours before I'd gone on that Netflix binge.
yeah,
you know.
absolutely. And it is difficult because, you feel like you've obtained some knowledge, or an insight that you just weren't either privy to or willing to view. And I think probably more so the willing to view piece rather than anything. I wouldn't have been willing to make the connection between farm animal to your Sunday roast, and I would have been quite happy with that continuing forever. I think one of the great things of me starting this and kind of seeing those journeys is that everything now is a consideration. From the clothes that I buy to the cleaning products that we use. Everything now is a consideration, and that wouldn't have been prior to this. So I guess I'm quite thankful of health being the trigger, but now it's opened up for many other things for me to focus on.
I was gonna ask you about that. go on that journey fairly quickly from health through to the environmental reasons to the ethical reasons. The way you describe it, and I think you kind of spot on, is almost that there was almost there was always that awareness there. It was just sort of like almost peeling back the layers that society's kind of put on us over the course of years to make sure that we disconnect and we're comfortable with uh, animal products being so pervasive in our lives, sort of thing. And I think you're absolutely right. It was there before. But did you kind of embrace all kind of those three angles, if you like, quite quickly, or was that a little bit of a journey? We joke about the Netflix binges, but was it as simple as through that out the other side, and now it's like, okay, right, well, what about our cleaning products? Where is that tested on animals? Was that the kind of journey? Was it quite slow, or was it quite a quick one for you?
I feel like it was quite quick. I mean, don't get me wrong. The health piece was the primary focus, and I think I was almost selfish to a degree that this was what got me into it, and this will continue to be my focus. But I think we were then very quick to want to find out more. So I think it was within a fortnight, and we'd cleared out Netflix on every kind of vegan or ethical and sustainable documentary that there was. And I think once you see that, you just can't unsee it. And I think that was the biggest thing, that we in all of those documentaries, you cover the animal welfare side of it, you cover, the sustainability and everything, the impact that we're having on the earth. And it just had a ripple effect. And I still don't class myself as vegan. I consider myself to be an aspiring vegan because I'm not nailing everything, and there's certain things that I might have bought that I just didn't check because I didn't make the connection. And that's typically something that might have been clothing, as the
Mm,
example.
mm.
um, Animal products we just haven't touched since day dot. But I think everything else just started to kind of gradually just make its way into our journey, I guess. But yeah, I would consider myself to be more of an aspiring vegan because as much as I'm you know making a huge leap forward from where I was, I'm sure there's still many more ways that I could improve. Whether that was just reducing some of the waste that we have, through food, or single-use plastics. We reduce that where we can. We shop in a wonderful plastic-free store nearby, but you can't get everything there. So by default, then you go to your supermarket, and you might then have those single-use items that are just kind of unavoidable at the moment, or to suit a circumstance, or just us being maybe slightly impatient. So there's certain things that we're still trying to fix, but hey, it's a big learning curve. Can't quite get there overnight, but we're certainly trying
It's a really challenging one, isn't it? Particularly,
massively.
whether you're trying to remove all traces of animal products, or whether you're thinking from an environmental standpoint, as you talk about there. If you're trying to go plastic free and only use clean sources of energy, etc., and some of it's cost prohibitive as well for
Mm,
many families. Many people would love to put a wind turbine on their sort of roof, and solar panels, etc., um and it can be prohibitive to some extent. So I'm kind of with you on that fact, really, that it's kind of a masterpiece that's never finished, sort of thing. We kind of have to keep aspiring, don't we? It's a difficult thing to say you've complete, you're complete. And I think that's, you raise an interesting point there about the term vegan, and I think we all know, from the sort of the definition, is probably a little more forgiving than the perception, um,
yeah,
in kind of people's eyes. And so it's interesting, when you talk about being an aspiring vegan, it's almost like that speaks to, once I use the tag, almost the title, I'm kind of holding myself up to incredible scrutiny Whereas,
Yeah.
and so it's an interesting point. It'd be good to get your kind of like your view on that, I suppose, from the definition versus the kind of the scrutiny piece.
Yeah, it's funny as well because I was just thinking then, I don't typically use the term vegan because I don't consider myself to have got that completely dialed in. But if we go to a restaurant, I will say vegan because I know then that, the expectations of what the food are, and what the options are and what you can and can't eat. And so yeah, I guess I use that because I think if I went to a local restaurant and just said, "Oh no, I'm plant based," I think it would cause more confusion than it would clarity. So I tend to go, I need something on a vegan menu. I only got any vegan options, and that just seems to be very clear. But then outside of that, then yeah, I'd probably go the more aspiring. But I think going back to our point earlier around, opening up for criticism or skepticism around diet, I think sometimes there can be that knee jerk reaction for those that aren't on board that might not necessarily then have a pop about the food because maybe there's proof there, they can see that I'm training better or anything else, but then they go, oh yeah, but I've seen you using a single-use plastic bottle the other day.
Yeah,
Wow, that was a one-off, and do you know what, for the one day out of the 365, that was the day I forgot to take my refillable water bottle. But
yeah.
there's that knee-jerk reaction again, and I guess it's can't have a pop on this, so maybe we have a challenge there. I'm not sure, but yeah, maybe you are opening yourself to scrutiny. I'm not sure,
No,
Tim. Maybe I'm just holding it in high regard. I'm not sure.
No, I think it's an interesting point. Like, I think within the community itself, and whatever that means, I think even that's a difficult thing to say. There's a vegan community, and we all kind of sit around the campfire at night. I think it's. I'd love that to be the case, but it's very, very kind of I suppose spread out, and that's kind of that has got all the wonderful benefits of being a diverse community. But I think my experience anyway of the people I've met is that there's not, obviously there's we all have a responsibility to minimize the harm caused to animals in whichever way is possible and practicable, and that's fairly far reaching, and so there's lots that would cover that. But with the same token, I think there's also a degree of I think the definitions, and somebody would correct me on this, but it is kind of as far as possible and practicable. So there are
Yeah,
there are the odd situation where like you say, there may be something that's led to either a mistake or a misunderstanding, or even like I think companies are incredibly good, particularly with processed foods, at using terms that confuse people and hide what the thing is. I mean, we've seen that with whether it be like was it high sugar corn fructose and all those kind of things that
yeah,
mask the name of something, right through to kind of milk has got about 1 million different names on the back of a product, and crushed beetles and all kinds of different things. You have to do an awful lot of research. So I think the term's forgiving, but I think the wider population, to your point, probably aren't. When you say vegan, they've connected that with a plastic bottle,
yeah,
because you once told them that it was the best choice environmentally. So they've now connected that with, well, everything
yeah.
Sam says now, he's up for scrutiny. If I see him doing anything that looks in the vaguest bit,
Dude, you're so vulnerable for it.
yeah,
And I think also as well, we've mentioned, the hook or the trigger, whatever it might be for each individual. For me, it was health. But you might have seen it as well, and I've seen a number of posts where people have just, you'll typically see through like Live Kindly or plant-based news and things like that will say, we're all in this together. Whatever it was that was your hook, that's great, and we're glad that you're on board. And if you didn't quite get this right, then let's not call each other out. And I think maybe that's the piece that I think in this community, because I do think it is a community.
mm, mm,
There's a lot of people, like, whether you go to a vegan event, whether it's a market or an exhibition, whatever it might be, everybody's pulling in the same direction, and it might be with a slightly different lead cause, but we're all typically pulling in the right direction or the same direction. And I think maybe that's something that we probably just need to see practice a little bit better, more so socially online, where the guys that have got into it through animal welfare aren't then calling those out that have got into it for health, and vice versa, and sustainability then gets pulled into it. I think if we can all just go, everybody's trying, and as long as everybody's trying and moving in the right direction and being conscious and considered in whatever decision, whether it's the stuff you put on your plate or whether it's the shoes that you put on your feet, if it's done with positive intent, then let's just give kudos to that. And if there's another option that we can suggest to say, oh look, they're Ace shoes, but you might want to try out this company. They've got a great sustainable range, something like that. Instead of this, you see videos where people are doing great, plant-based meals, and they'll get called because they can see that there's a leather jacket in the background, or things like that. You just go, but they're here teaching about great food. That was their intent. They're doing the great thing. And yes, they probably could, find another alternative to that leather jacket in the background. But still, we're making a big leap forward. And I think maybe that's where I would like to see it change, in that community space anyway. Slightly off tangent. But.
No, I think it's really relevant point, actually, and a source of much debate for me. And I sort of, I'm kind of like with everyone who's got, the strength in their conviction to want to, I guess, to call out every form of oppression. Like I'm fully behind that when I see that, and I mention that particularly because I sometimes see folks who are in that space, in that headspace, kind of probably calling some other people out sometimes. And I think there's degrees of it. I think, to your point, I think if there's always a positive intent behind it, it's there to, I'm saying something because that's a piece of information that you might not know, or that it might support with your journey or understanding of something. Like I've sort of almost sought to understand before I've made a jibe almost, or shot that person down. Then I kind of see merit in that, us sort of all teaching each other within the community, if you like. But with the same token, I'm absolutely with you on the, how much use is it to comment on somebody's video when they're cooking about that particular thing, especially you don't know the context, you don't know. I mean, there's a whole debate over like preganism, if you like. So the idea of, well, I owned that leather jacket 15 years ago and I became vegan 5 years ago. So what's the worst thing to do?
That's one thing that from the first vegan market I went to in Cardiff, and I forget the girl I spoke to. Her name was Hannah. She had a stall set up, and we were very new to it then. I think we were in our first month of kind of going vegan, so to speak, and we were like, oh, we're trying to figure out things to do. I've got a leather belt on. Like, what do I do? She was like, I got on board from an animal welfare point of view. I would look at it as wasteful. That product has been made, and yes, it's not maybe through the choice that we would prefer, but it has been made, and I think you're better off seeing the life of that out for as long as you can. So I was then very comfortable with going, look, if it's something that was pre-owned of mine that was before all of this, I'm not going to start throwing things out. But I won't replace it with something else of that type again. I'll be very conscious in the decisions going forward. But yeah, it's a great point.
No, I'm totally with you. I think that's the right way to sort of be, and I do think there's, I say right way, but that's my view of the right way, if you like. I definitely think
it's expensive, Jim.
Yeah,
it's really expensive if you just suddenly cleared everything out.
Well, exactly. No, you're exactly right. Especially like, I mean, I don't know the ins and outs, but I imagine like, there's probably some cycling shoes somewhere within your your collection that may have been leather. I don't know if they're ever made of leather, actually, to be fair. But those kind of things, you might have spent hundreds of pounds on those, and do you throw those away? Well,
Yeah.
that feels disrespectful, wasteful, not good for the planet, etc. Yeah, to your point, would I buy another pair? Probably not, but it certainly doesn't feel right to throw things away, in my
Mm.
opinion. I mean, I've heard some people, and I think it's kind of it's a really I think this is also an honourable way to go, if you like, that if they feel really feel deeply uncomfortable with it, that they'll donate that, pass it on to a friend or family member.
Yeah.
Then that's kind of cool too. I think whichever way you feel most comfortable with. Um, but yeah, as far as possible and practicable, would cover for me. You don't replace it, obviously, but
Yeah.
yeah. So totally with you. I'd love to move on to some of the work that you've been doing in this space of fundraising, because you're more active than the average person. Absolutely. Very committed to your fitness and cycling, etc., and beyond. And I'd just like to sort of make sure that we did talk about the work you do for cardiac risk in the young, and
Yeah.
the kind of fundraising that you've been doing of late. So it'd be cool to hear a little bit about that, and how you got into supporting them.
Yeah, it was one of those things actually. It's an organization that my mum actually pointed out to me. And it was when the diagnosis kind of took, its turn. I didn't really know where to look in terms of any support. If I was probably going to need some counselling, because if I hadn't have got the kind of thumbs up a few months later to kind of try and be active again, then I think I probably would have needed it. But yeah, she pointed me in the direction of this. I'd reached out to other couple of charities and organisations, and got a very default template response back. It felt very impersonal, which was the opposite of what I was looking for then. I needed this big hug around me to say, look, everything's going to be okay. You can stop crying about your bike. We will get you back on it. Let's try and figure out a plan. And yeah, I reached out to Cardiac Risk in the Young and just got the most personal email back. And they pulled me in just on that one email alone. And the amazing thing with them is, whilst I didn't necessarily need any support, they were checking in. It might just have been an email here and there, but it was a check-in to say, hey Sam, just following up on your email. How's things? How are you getting on with things? Any updates? And it was just that real breath of fresh air that I needed. That there was an organization out there, a charity that did really care about people in that scenario. And my case is mild in comparison to what some people have. There's a lot of people that find out when it's too late. And unfortunately we read about them in the news or whatever it might be. And yeah, so they're all about trying to test people ahead of anything happening. Ultimately, it's prevention rather than cure. So I reached out to them and said, look, I really appreciated the way that you helped me. That glimmer of hope, I guess, at the start of the journey, and I'd love to try and repay that. And yeah, they sent me, just a nice little welcome pack of, look, this is where we kind of invest our money. This is how much, this scan might cost, or this is how much we can get 10 scans for, and all the rest of it. And I just was like, right, this is going to be my cause going forward. So yeah, that was kind of the charity of choice. And yeah, we progressed obviously with the diagnosis and the improvements in health, and was given the all clear to be very tentative on the bike. And then the next scan came through, and it's like, okay, look, you can probably push a little bit harder now. And so I did, and got myself back signed up for the Dragon Ride, which is the annual event that you and I were chatting about, that where I'd met Sean for the first time. Because the diagnosis was literally about 2 weeks prior to when I should have been doing it. So I then couldn't. So I went up and I was support crew for my wife, who was doing the Macmillan 100, and then Sean and a few of the other guys that were doing the 153K ride. So I was just gutted. It was an emotional day, but I was able to get myself back on the training track and got myself to the following year. And I just said, right, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to raise money for these guys. Obviously, all friends and family were kind of aware of my journey, because I've been raising money for, I think it was the RNLI, if I remember rightly. I was raising money for them, and obviously had to say that I was cancelling the event. So yeah, they were kind of aware of it, and the amount of support was phenomenal. Yeah, I did the ride, which was amazing to kind of be back there. And I'd only ever ridden the Dragon Ride twice, including that event, and both times somehow it managed to be 30 degrees in Wales, which I think is unheard of. And yeah, it was a beautiful day. We finished the ride, a real sense of achievement, and yeah, that just became my theme. So yeah, that's who I support going forward. But they're an amazing charity. They do so much for kind of the 18 to 30. I think 30 is the cutoff in terms of testing ahead of anything. But the amount of support that they offer as well for those going through it, for those that have unfortunately maybe lost somebody that's had a cardiac issue. Just an amazing charity that are just wonderful. Like from start to finish, they've been superb. Yeah, I couldn't speak highly enough of them.
That's incredible work, and thanks for giving them a shout out. I think before we'd spoken, I hadn't necessarily heard about them, and like you say, they just do amazing work for so many people out there. So yeah, thanks for turning hopefully so many people onto them through the events that you've been doing, and hopefully through the podcast as well, we'll get some more people.
Yeah, it's been
supporting them.
What's been really nice is a couple of kind of slightly younger friends of mine that fit within that age category, and also a couple of friends that have kids that fit into that category as well. I've also had them scanned because they might have been concerned, and unfortunately all the results have come back and everything's fine. But it's been great to kind of ease the strain on the NHS, which we know is incredibly stretched, and they're doing an amazing job. So I think if there's an organisation that can help and ease that strain at the same time, then yeah, it's just they are brilliant. And they, off the back of that, they do like a newsletter. So they had a big write up in there of the event and how much we'd raised and things like that. And yeah, it was just a really nice touch. So yeah, great cause.
Very cool. Thank you. And I've got a final big question for you, which is, and we talked about this before we hit record actually. But your kind of viewpoint in terms of, how confident you feel about our hopefully eventual transition towards a kind of vegan world, whatever that your definition of world is.
Yeah, I think in terms of our immediate world, I think we'll certainly see, a continued change. When I think back to when this started, I remember trying to get some lunch. My wife and I were heading out for a walk in the hills. We stopped into a supermarket and we were like, right, we'll just get some sandwiches and so on. We left with a banana and a packet of nuts. So that goes to show the options just 2.5 years ago, and where we are now. I'm kind of frustrated if there's not more than 3 or 4 options available for a sandwich. So I think in terms of like our immediate world in the UK, massive transition. I'm quite hopeful that will move forward. I think around the rest of the world, it's really difficult to say, but I think everybody's starting to pay attention. So whatever their hook is, I think we're getting there, and people will do what they can. I'm relatively positive.
I love
more
that.
Positive than negative, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, I think we all have a choice, don't we, as to whether to be positive or negative. I choose the positive,
Yeah,
so I'm with you.
absolutely.
I'm with you.
Yeah, I'm hopeful. I think everyone's doing a great job. And you just got to look at if you think of like the guys at Bosch or Gaz. I'm trying to think of his surname now.
Oakley?
Um, yeah, I think so. Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, yeah, Gaz Oakley. These guys that are going out and doing amazing things with food. And I think if we can start with people thinking about what they put on their plate, it impacts all of the three areas that we're all really
Yeah.
concerned by. But it's almost like it doesn't make them think about that. But if you start to get into it like I did, the hook was health. I'm on board with everything now, and I think you just need to get into that journey at whatever point you are, get into it, and everything will kind of look after itself, I hope.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm absolutely with you. I think a variety of people come into it for a variety of different reasons, and no entry point is a bad one if it's a hook that works. Whether it's you've cooked an amazing uh you know burger, or you've it's like a junk food thing or a health thing or whatever. I'm open to anybody uh you know creating something that means that somebody kind of will pay attention and hopefully go on that journey.
Yeah, definitely. So, Jim, what was the first vegan meal that you cooked, and is it
Oh,
one that still sits within your kind of go-tos?
that's a really good question. Do you know what? I think for the first, I'd say probably a month or so, like my wife and I we're not actually, we've become like quite passionate about cooking now, but I don't think
Yeah,
we absolutely weren't when we were kind of omnivorous
yeah,
folk. We were pretty. I wouldn't have said we would have. I mean, I probably would now, but I wouldn't have said we necessarily ate badly. It was just quite like 4 or 5 things put together, kind of like
mm.
bag of salad, chicken breast. That like it was there was no. We weren't really hugely creative. It was like a pot of
Yeah,
hummus. Which is still actually there's nothing changed there, but it was like
yeah.
hummus.
More
Just,
pots of hummus.
yeah. Although I make it now, to be fair, because I
Oh, fair play.
yeah, well, I just can't bring myself to buy shop bought hummus. There's loads of olive oil in it as well, like and
Yeah,
yeah, all the rest of it. But anyway, but our first, so we were kind of just putting things together, but they were things that were probably arguably we were eating, health quite healthily actually. It was like, well, we'll
yeah,
roast up a bunch of vegetables and then we'll get some, I don't know, some quinoa or something, and then we used to put like pumpkin seeds on everything. I don't really know why, just because I think we'd probably seen somebody on Instagram and thought,
health
well,
kick.
yeah, that looks good. So it would be like we'd spray some pumpkin seeds over the top of it, and then some hummus. It was like this kind of like sort of like tapas on a plate kind of situation. And we did it for like almost like just every day for ages, because it was like we didn't know what else to eat,
Yeah,
apart from like breakfast and stuff. Like breakfast was always good because it was like, well, you can just get like a bagel and put some peanut butter on
yeah,
it, and like that feels pretty good, or some porridge or whatever. But I think over the course of time, we sort of developed the kind of the desire to cook. And actually, I think at the current moment, it's like a combination of uh, like baking cakes and then trying to like Zwift them off. I think that
it's a
seems,
vicious cycle.
yeah, that
No pun
seems to,
intended, but yeah,
yeah,
it
yeah,
definitely is, isn't it?
that seems to be what the plan is during this lockdown. So, but it does mean that we've baked a lot more, and we've got a little 2-year-old. So we're trying to get him involved, although he just eats ingredients, to be fair.
Yeah, yeah,
But
it's got the best job out of that, isn't it? But you definitely have to learn to cook again. I think that's what I found
totally,
was, yeah, everything had been a staple for so long, hadn't it? That it was then,
yeah.
yeah. I think if I didn't have the Deliciously Ella app when I'd made that decision,
Yeah.
I wouldn't have known where to begin.
We were quite
Um,
late to Deliciously Ella, actually. I think it wasn't until we went to her restaurant in London, on Wayhouse Street.
yeah,
Um, and then we went there, and I think that actually inspired us to do some cooking at that point, because it was like, this is what it's supposed to be like. Like,
And
it's not.
it's so good as well, isn't
It's
it? I
so
must
good.
admit, I honestly think the food I eat now is so much nicer than anything that I would have eaten previously.
Agreed.
Um,
Yeah. I don't know
yeah,
about you, but I used to, like I say, I'd buy like a piece of chicken or a bit of steak or something, and it was almost like everything else was just like a kind of add on to that. It was like what is like a
mm,
garnish to that thing.
yeah.
It was like,
That
uh,
was the centerpiece.
yeah,
What can I get away with putting on the plate that looks remotely like a meal?
yeah, exactly. No real, you know, health benefit to it. And I read, you believe what you read, don't you? So I did anyway, and it was like protein, protein, protein. That's what we all need, right? So I was just like,
Yeah,
yeah, just, well, this chicken breast, that must have loads of protein in it, because I've seen, Rocky eat it or whatever. So I keep
yeah,
eating these, and I'll look like the Rock. And it's like, well, you won't. That's not kind of how
yeah,
it. It's not kind of how it
yeah.
works, and it
Which
didn't
is
work. Funny enough.
Yeah, and it's funny that because we've mentioned obviously the triggers for everybody, and the biggest question I got, being involved in just being active all the time was, what about your protein? And I think that's arguably one of the biggest questions for most people that are vegan or plant based, whatever they prefer, um, are asked. But that's all I was getting all the time, and I consciously started to track, my calories and macros and stuff. And I wanted to just see how that would compare because having been very conscious about my food previously, I knew I was always aiming for 160 to 200 grams of protein per day. And, that was like just drilled into me. That was what I needed to do to, either maintain or, drive muscle mass, whatever was on the cards at the time. And I then remember checking it, and I was averaging between sort of 70 and 100 grams a day, but recovering so much better than what I did previously. And people just couldn't get their heads around it to the point where it was just, we don't believe you. It just can't be the case. So yeah, it's super interesting. Like you said, protein, protein, protein. But now I think the food is, it's amazing, and there's such a depth of flavor. I think that's what makes me very happy to always put something on the plate. Is that
Oh,
there's
totally.
so much that's gone into it.
Yeah, I'm definitely converted to looking forward to meals and looking forward to cooking, actually. Whereas I was never of that, you know, that ilk before. It was the main meal was just a sort of an entree to the dessert, really, for me. It was always that was always my sort of ambition: get the main meal out of the way so you can get the dessert on the go. And now I'm much more. Well, I still like the dessert, but I'm much more enjoying the kind of the creation process of cooking and the flavor combinations. And yeah, you just pick up on different flavors, I think, over the course of time. Like, I don't know about you, but like just vegetables, things like just something as basic as like carrots or broccoli or whatever. I don't think I ever really. I think my palate was so dulled with sort of fat and salt and sugar that I'd kind of, unless it was like a screaming flavor, I wouldn't couldn't almost recognize it. And then after a while, I found the palate kind of changed, and I could recognize, broccoli or peppers, or they all had this unique flavor that just didn't exist before in my world. So I don't know if you found the same, but I certainly did.
Yeah, definitely. And I also think, going back to your point on, you choose your centerpiece of the meal, which got all the attention, so typically your piece of meat then would have been, seasoned to the high
Mm.
heavens. You would have done everything around that. And then everything like you said around the side would have had minimal thought. So all those things like, the carrots, the broccoli, wouldn't have got any attention. They would have been steamed or boiled. And now I think of, if I do carrots, then they're going to be roasted, and, they're going to be seasoned in such a way that every flavor that carrot would have naturally is out. And yeah, just it sounds mad to be so passionate about a vegetable.
No, I'm with
Um,
you. I'm with you.
but when you put the effort, the same effort that you would have done on that centerpiece previously, if you put the same effort into everything else in there, then all of a sudden you've got an amazing meal. And you kind of have an appreciation for that so much more than what you would have done previously. I know I couldn't go back to eating veg the way I did before
No, no.
because it just was so lackluster in its flavor. Whereas now, um, yeah, I mean, we get through tons of veg, and I just love to see how you can get creative with it, whether it's roasting it on its own or whether it's in something. Yeah, just really good flavors. I feel like I've just geeked out on carrots, which is slightly odd, but
Nah, not at all.
yeah, I'm
Uh,
I'm all on board.
it's a vegan podcast. If you can't geek
Yeah.
out on carrots on a vegan podcast, then you can't anywhere. To be fair.
Yeah, exactly.
Uh, well, Sam, thanks so much for your time. It's been awesome chatting with you, and stay safe and well, and to the family too, and we'll hopefully speak again soon. But thank you so much. It's been great chatting with you.
Oh, thanks, Jim. Pleasure. Stay safe, buddy.